Hello and welcome to Politics Southeast. In the next half hour, warnings that new border checks could mean years of disruption on Kent's roads.
When everyone goes through the little cut roads, yeah, so it blocks up a lot harder. Yeah, so it puts more time on your journey home.
The scandal of forced adoptions. We'll hear from the Sussex woman campaigning on behalf of 180,000 mothers who had their babies taken away.
I vaguely remember being in that hospital. I don't remember feeding her or anything. It's just a blank.
And would you like to see more flights taking off from Gatwick?
At a time when we're fighting climate change, when we're all aware of the changes, the flooding we've had recently, we shouldn't be allowing an airport to be expanding in this way.
Well, I'm Charlotte Wright, and joining me on the sofa this week are Henry Smith, the Conservative MP for Crawley, and Councillor Karen Constantine, who is the Deputy Leader of the Labour Group on Kent County Council. Well, let's start with those warnings that new border checks, due to be brought in before the end of the year, could mean years of misery for motorists as traffic backs up on the M20 approaching Dover. Here's what Kent County Council's Cabinet Member for Roads had to say.
I don't think we can downplay how big of an impact it could well have on Kent, and over an extended period. We're not talking just going into October and there being a bit of a blip and then everything being back to normal. I think we've got to be realistic here. We could be looking at the equivalent of 3 years solid of Brock being in place. We know how bad life is when Brock's in place for a day or two. Imagine that almost infinitely worse. But I do think we have to make clear throughout all of this what we think, us as an authority, this will mean to Kent. So we cannot be accused come October, if everything does snarl up as badly as I fear it might, of people saying, well, why didn't you warn everyone about this? Well, frankly, we are. This is going to be a serious, serious mess.
Well, that was a pretty stark warning from Kent County Council there. To tell us more, we're joined by the independent journalist and travel expert, Simon Calder. Thanks so much for joining us, Simon. I suppose we could start by talking about why the EU is bringing in these checks. What will they involve?
Well, this is something that actually was well known at the time of the Brexit referendum, and I'm sorry to bring it up so early in the programme. And of course, nearly 1 million people in Kent voted emphatically in favour of leaving the European Union. I think it was 59 to 41. So a perfectly reasonable democratic choice. However, it comes with many travel strings attached, including something that actually British diplomats were working on before the Brexit vote for the entry-exit system. And that very simply means that at the moment, of course, I turn up at Dover with my passport, the police aux frontières, the French border guards, have a look and stamp my passport. But from October, we think it's going to get much more complicated. The first time I travel through, I've got to have all my fingerprints taken. Then I've got to also have my facial biometric checked. And in future visits, I have to have a facial biometric. Now, you can kind of do that at airports. We're almost used to it, anybody who's flown to the US. But to have that in a setting such as the Port of Dover, and to a lesser extent at the Eurotunnel terminal in Folkestone, is going to be very challenging indeed.
And Simon, challenges at the port often mean Operation Brock. Can you just explain for people who don't live in Kent and don't experience Operation Brock what it actually is and the impact it has on people?
Well, this is a long-running system which is basically in place to cope with calamities, and the idea that you will have trucks stacking on part of the M20 motorway, which obviously should be carrying vehicles in a free-flowing way, but it's the least bad option of possibly snarling up Kent. And exactly as we were hearing, motorists will think, oh, I'm not going to bother getting stuck in queues. I'm going to nip off around the side streets and all the country lanes, and it all gets very very jammed very quickly, as we have seen on many occasions. I think what we're seeing here, though, is the idea that from day one, and the European Commission have told me they want to bring this in on a kind of big bang basis so that everything changes all at once. Suddenly, if I'm driving a car, I am going to be turning up at the port of Dover. They have to have these steps applied. And at the moment, given that there's such a small footprint of land between the cliffs and the channel, it's very difficult to see how it would be done.
So what have the Port of Dover been saying to you about it?
Well, the Port of Dover has obviously been working on this literally for years because we knew it was coming down the track. It's one of those impossible conundrums. Can I possibly, for example, register my fingerprints somehow doing that remotely online? What can I do possibly involving the western docks of Dover, where certainly you could at least process cruise coaches there, but it's still going to present a mighty problem if the European Union does as it's always said it's going to do, which is said anybody who's coming into the EU has, and they're a third country national, which is what we negotiated to be after Brexit, has to do this. So I kind of like, I don't wish to get too political in my role, but it would be really good to understand from Brexiteers what they had in mind for dealing with this, since it was a clear consequence of both the democratic vote to leave the EU and the decision by the UK government to negotiate to become third country nationals. So it's a mess. Dover knows it has potential to be a mess. Eurotunnel is spending tens of millions of pounds in trying to make it easier and effectively create a little kind of side area where I can go along and put the necessary biometric details in. And ultimately, the idea is Europe's borders become more secure. But in order to get that degree of security, it's going to be quite a struggle. And I'm afraid the implications for Kent aren't great, because rationally, people are going to think, well, I don't want to get caught up in that. I'm going to go to a port like Newhaven or maybe like Portsmouth, where I know I will be able to go through all the rigmarole when I get to France, and therefore I don't need to mess around getting stuck on the A2 or the A20.
Possibly a boost for Newhaven then. That's really interesting. Just a quick final answer, because we'll speak to the politicians in just a second. What do you think politicians can actually do? Have you got any suggestions?
I think they need to be talking very, very in a very cooperative way with Brussels, and just saying, Big Bang, really? October, really? Everybody, really? You know that's not going to work. You know it's going to snarl up the short straits crossing. We really need to come up with something in the same way, dare I say it, that Northern Ireland, of course, which was the other great Brexit conundrum. The Windsor Agreement means there's a kind of fudge there, and I'm sure there is some variety of fudge that will be available to sort this out. People will grumble, but anything is worse than the sorts of problems we've seen, and which I have reported on far too many times, standing outside the entrance to the Port of Dover with cars and coaches stacked up.
We've all been there. We've all been there, Simon. Thank you so much. Glad to see you with your passport. A diligent travel journalist there. Thanks so much, Simon Calder. Well, let's chat to our guests about this now. Karen, you're on Kent County Council. The Conservative administration were raising concerns there, but presumably Labour are worried too.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a huge problem for us all to deal with. But I think Simon raises two really interesting points. One is about, we voted for this collectively, this is an outcome of Brexit. But the second point is about the negotiations. And I think it kind of behoves the government, the Conservatives now, to look at these negotiations, because how can they be conducted with efficacy when everybody knows an election is needed? There isn't the will on the European side to negotiate with people that are going to disappear. That's just a fact of life. So I think we do need radical change. I'm not just being party political, but I think we need that radical change. I think we need that general election. And I think this will be one of the issues on the desk of whoever is the next Prime Minister. And I think it's going to be really detrimental for the people of Kent and Dover in particular.
OK, Henry, does an election solve everything then?
No, I don't think it does, and this isn't exactly a new situation. It might be a new system that the European Union are introducing, but Operation Stack, for example, started in 1988. Operation Brock has been running for a while as well, so we are well used to disruption at the channel ports, whether that be industrial action by the French, or last year one of the French passport IT systems went down and caused these sorts of problems.
We don't want to continue, we don't want to kind of add that unnecessarily, do we? We need to try and avoid that if we can.
I think it is possible to avoid this, and that's for the European Commission to be sensible about this. If you look at people coming from the European Union to the UK, we allow them to use e-gates. We're not insisting on fingerprints or facial recognition. We have unilaterally said that people from the European Union can come through the UK border with as much ease as possible. And really,
now we've left the European Union, there's not really the will on their side to make those kinds of concessions, is there?
Well, I think the European Union are being very petulant on this, and I think it's almost trying to sort of make some sort of point. But there's damage also potentially to the French economy. A lot of Brits go on holiday to France, and if that is a less popular destination, then there are consequences on that as well. But this is nothing new. Even when the UK was a member of the European Union, we were never a member of the Schengen Treaty area, and so there have always been these border checks. And really, I think it is important that the government look to negotiate with the European Commission so that they have sensible border arrangements. And also, I think it's important that Kent County Council is supported as well.
OK, all right, Karen, just before we move on, if Labour were in power there, and you say you want an election, would they get a bit closer to the EU on issues like this, like borders?
I think on the practical side of life, yes, I think we would have fresh teams, fresh faces in Brussels, fresh people going off to do those negotiations. And I think what's important is they're there to stay. You know, it's a 5-year term of office, where at the moment I think we've had change after change after change. We've certainly had lots of changes of Prime Minister. And I think there's a sense of that we are relatively chaotic compared to the rest of the European state. So why would people invest their time and energy negotiating with faces who are just going to disappear? I mean, that's just a fact of life. That's where we've got to now. That's why I think we really need a general election, because we need to be on a fresh footing. On a fresh footing, we can move forward.
I think there's going to be lots more calls for general election and election chat in the coming months, isn't there? I don't think we quite found any solutions, but we'll leave that to the people in charge. Let's move now to the shocking story of forced adoptions. According to a report published by Parliament in 2022, more than 180,000 women were coerced into giving up their babies in the UK in the 1950s, 60s and 70s. Most were young and unmarried at a time when, for many, there was still shame and stigma attached to becoming pregnant while single or out of wedlock. Thousands were sent far away to so-called mother and baby homes where their pregnancies were concealed, and they were pressured into signing adoption papers. Marcella Whittingdale's been speaking to Veronica. She's one of the affected mothers, calling for the government to make an official apology over its role in the scandal.
A trained nurse, Veronica Smith from Seaford has spent her life looking after other people. But when she fell pregnant, unmarried at 24 in the early 60s, she was made to feel ashamed and unfit to be a mother.
How old was your daughter when she was taken away? How long did you get with her?
8 days. Yeah.
Veronica's own mother secretly sent her to a mother and baby hostel, and later she gave birth at a hospital in Surrey run by nuns. Her mother organised for the child to be taken away by a Catholic adoption agency, and that was the last Veronica saw of her newborn. She says it was so traumatising she has few memories of her time there and doesn't even remember saying goodbye.
From the hostel I was in, we used to go in a sort of crocodile to church, and you know, you could hear the congregation whispering, "Oh, those girls from up the road," and just made to feel dirty. I cannot remember much about that time. I vaguely remember being in that hospital. I don't remember feeding her or anything. It's just a blank.
More than 180,000 women like Veronica in the 50s, 60s and 70s were shamed and coerced into giving up their babies. Birth mothers and adoptees have long campaigned for a government apology. while in 2022 a committee of MPs made the same recommendation.
The UK government says they recognise the suffering that so many women and their children had to endure. And they say they're sorry on behalf of society for what happened. But they have so far stopped short of an official apology.
But while society undoubtedly played a role in shaming unmarried mothers into giving up their babies, recent research has discovered government policy also played its part.
They say that an apology isn't something they're going to pursue because they don't feel that the state had any central involvement. The records of the government itself, a very cursory examination of those shows that the whole process of historical forced adoption was financed, underwritten, legislated and enacted on behalf of central government.
It's lovely that you've got so many photos.
Yeah.
Now, happily married, she is in contact with the daughter she was forced to give up. She says an apology from the state would at least acknowledge not only how she was mistreated, but also just how much she was made to miss out on.
That was Marcella Whittingdale with that report. And Karen, I know this is a particularly personal story for you because you were actually sent to one of these mother and baby homes when you were 15.
Yes, I was.
How did you end up there?
1978. Oh, well, I got pregnant because we only did locusts as sex education in my all-girls Catholic girls' school. And I was pregnant and I went to church as usual, and the priest took us to the back of the church and opened a huge directory and said, we'll send her there, and that was it. My fate was sealed. I want to say thank you to Veronica, and just to say my heart goes out to her and all of those other women. And I'm in contact now with a lot of them to start to tell these stories. You know, there was my story, which is one thing, and I was very fortunate.
So tell us about that, because they tried to pressure you into giving up your son when you were there at the mother and baby home, but you didn't.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, I was with somebody that was both a priest and a social worker. So talk about conflict of responsibilities there. And I would meet with him on an almost daily basis and be passed the papers to sign, and was told, your baby will be better off, your baby will have a better life, will be properly looked after. And it's very difficult at 15 and completely as green as grass, to work, and there's no access to information. You don't feel like you've got any rights. You don't know if you've got any rights. But, I felt at 15 very bonded with my baby whilst I was pregnant. And it's only my enduring stubborn streak that meant that I kept my son. And I'm very grateful that I did. But the stories that I'm now hearing of what happened to those women, and also those children that were, surrendered, forced to be given away from their mothers, those stories are heart-wrenching and horrific, and that apology is much needed. And whilst I'm a politician, I'll spend my time now trying to make sure that
apology
is forthcoming, because it is so needed.
And you're writing a book.
Yes.
In collaboration with many of the other women.
Yes. So I'm basically meeting with people, and they're explaining to me their circumstances, and I'm now sort of putting that together. I've met with about 20 women and some men, both birth mothers and also adult adoptees. And at the root of all of that, is the burden of shame, which most of these women carry. Their children also carry it because they feel that they were given away unnecessarily. The situations are always very complex, and I don't think, it's like a lot of the sort of social justice scandals that we've had in this country, not least of all with Horizon and the sub-postmasters and mistresses. This is another hidden scandal, and this happened in the 50s, 60s and 70s. It was at least 185,000
So why do you think
women.
Why is the government reluctant to apologise, seemingly?
I don't understand that, because I think, the Scottish government gave that apology and the Welsh governments gave the apology, and for some reason it's been kicked into the long grass.
What would the apology mean to you?
I'm not in that particular cohort. I've not been considered technically in that apology, because I'm post 76, my circumstances. But I know for those women they are taking the sense of shame to their grave, because what they say, and what I understand firsthand, is they did sign the papers. Even though they were coerced, even though they were being forced, ultimately they signed that document to say, you can take my baby. And I think this apology would set the record straight. It would mean it was actually formally understood that there was pressure, that the pressure of shame meant they had no other way forward. And also, I think there's a lot that we can learn from these circumstances, pertinent to the way we treat children now and pertinent to adoption processes now. And we shouldn't miss an opportunity to move forward with that increased understanding.
OK. Henry, what do you make of this? Do you think the government should apologise?
Well, it's absolutely heartbreaking. And I think one of the things that we can look to are other countries where apologies have been issued. Australia, for example, I know in Ireland, Canada, Denmark, many other countries where sadly the sort of legislation that the state at the time, half a century ago, enacted, and also societal attitudes, as we've discussed, caused this coercion. I think an apology is probably right to be made for those historical wrongs, because this isn't just something that's in the history books. This is something that many people are still suffering today the effects of, whether that be those parents who were forced coerced to give up their babies for adoption, and indeed many of those adoptees who, some of whom are rediscovering their birth parents, but will have had lifelong effects and will do for many years to come.
It's interesting hearing Karen bring up the post office scandal. Do you think sometimes politicians are kind of too slow to make amends over things like this?
I think it's really important in a democracy that when mistakes are made, that those are owned up to and learnt from. So hopefully we can avoid making similar mistakes in the future. So I do think, even though the events of, in this case, coerced adoptions took place before probably anyone is in Parliament today, at the time, I do think it's important that the state, when historical mistakes have been made, does recognise that, and there's plenty of precedent for it.
All right, thank you, Henry, and thank you very much, Karen, for sharing your story. Right, let's move on. We can talk about flights taking off from Gatwick. Would you like to see more of them? Next month, we'll see the first of a series of hearings into whether the airport should be allowed to expand by bringing its emergency runway into regular use. The major refit is part of a plan that could see an extra 28 million passengers fly a year versus the airport's pre-pandemic peak. That's an increase of more than 60%. Gatwick says it'll be a boost for the local economy, but some campaigners are worried about noise and pollution, as well as the impact of extra airport workers on local services.
We have a lack of hospitals, we have a lack of schools, we have a lack of amenities. The roads are horrendous as they are, and with it comes obviously declining air quality. At a time when we're fighting climate change, when we're all aware of the changes, the flooding we've had recently, we shouldn't be allowing an airport to be expanding in this way.
OK, there's some of the criticisms there. Henry, what's the positive case for expanding Gatwick?
Well, I've always been in favour of Gatwick growing its business so long as it can do that within its current footprint, and using the northern runway for short-haul flights would free up extra capacity, and the projection is that by the next decade that would create some 14,000 extra jobs and boost the local economy by some £1 billion. So I do think there are lots of benefits that can be considered, so long as Gatwick can articulate the infrastructure benefits that would come with that. So just recently, the upgrade to Gatwick Station, over £150 million investment, has opened, increasing capacity. And the fact that actually the employment footprint of Gatwick stretches all the way from South London down to Brighton, and from sort of Horsham to right here in Tunbridge Wells as well. This is something that I think has potential for the sub-region.
What about housing, though? For these people, workers are presumably going to move into the area and need to work at the airport. Where are they going to live?
Well, as I say, I think with economic expansion at Gatwick, that is something that isn't just a benefit to Crawley or Hawley in the immediate environs of Gatwick Airport, but actually would benefit Surrey, Sussex and even West Kent and South London as well. So I think
there'll be more people, won't there, that need to come and work at Gatwick, so they'll need to live in the local area. How many do you think could end up coming to live in the local area?
Well, I'm a big fan of supplying employment to local people, and I'm a big fan of growing the economy. And I think if we have more people in employment and a bigger economy, then that's good in terms of people's prosperity, so that we can afford the public services that we all want.
What about the climate change argument? I mean, you've described climate change as the greatest long-term threat that we face. How do you weigh that up against it?
There is a balance that has to be struck. We are an island trading nation. We very much rely on that global connectivity. That is very important. And this country is the leading economy out of all G20 economies around the world in terms of ensuring that we are reducing our carbon footprint, and we are on track to see net zero carbon by 2050, and that includes the aviation industry as well. Gatwick Airport have a target of net zero carbon by 2040.
That's the airport itself, not the emissions from flights, is it? And the government's own climate advisors say that to hit net zero targets, we can't expand our airports. Just a brief thought on that before I bring Karen in.
Well, we have to have a choice. Are we going to sacrifice economic growth and prosperity? I don't think that is mutually exclusive. I think what we are seeing is significant investment in this country in sustainable aviation fuels, hydrogen technology. So I think it is possible that through that development we can continue to have that global connectivity for having a prosperous economy, and at the same time reach our net zero targets by 2050.
Karen, what do you make of that?
Well, let's think about where we are with the economy. I don't disagree with some of the arguments you've made, particularly around jobs and economic growth, which is obviously absolutely vital. But the way it is with our economy at the moment, after 14 years of Conservative rule, we've gone from a £1.1 trillion debt to a £2.2 trillion debt. And that's a huge burden on every man, woman and child in this country. That is what we've got. The truth is, we can't get to carbon neutral doing what we're doing, and certainly not doing more of what we're doing. We've got to reduce carbon emissions. So does it make sense to expand Gatwick? Doesn't it also make sense to look at other forms of public transport that could substitute for flights, the way they do in Europe?
It'll take a long time, though,
lots more
wouldn't it?
train journeys. People don't use the trains here so much because they're ferociously expensive compared to Europe. I think there's more that we could do. But I mean, I think my key issue...
Would you get the train to Spain, though?
Yes, it would be a lovely journey. It would be lovely. Through Paris, down to Barcelona and down to the south. And people do it all the time. And train travel in Spain is incredibly cheap. And their Prime Minister is urging people to get onto trains and slash the prices to encourage people to do that. It's a brilliant way of travelling. I would travel by train any day of the week compared to flights. But the other point, and it's a much more serious point, is also about the impact on health. And what is the remediation against impact on health?
Thank you very much, Karen and Henry, for joining us. I'm afraid we're out of time now. Thanks to all of our guests and Simon as well. I'll be back next Sunday. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Bye-bye for now.